Hello, welcome back into another edition of the Sun Devil Source podcast presented by our friends over at Jones Auto Centers. As always, I'm your host, Jacob Brooks, and alongside me is our Sun Devil Source publisher, Chris Cartman. Chris, how's it going today? Another day, another dollar.
Good. Yeah, rolling along. We were at a press conference preparing everyone for the start of preseason camp. Kenny Dillingham didn't really have too many new things to say. Sort of status quo on Kamari Anderson, should be ready for the start of the season. Probably they'll be cautious with him, non-contact at the beginning of camp. No new injuries, which is a positive thing for that fans will like to hear. And there was one piece of news that we have, which is that Chance Rucker, who came in from Michigan State and was expected to compete for a two-deep spot at cornerback, is not going to be with the team this season. That was just some, internal stuff, and they decided that they were going to go in different directions. That was a very deep group in the spring, I felt. Rucker certainly, had some experience and added to that, or would have added to that. But I think, as we'll talk about in the corners here later on, I still think that they have good options and redundancy and some backups who will be ready to go.
Yeah, so let's just get straight into it then, Chris. This is part 3 of our 4-part series previewing ASU fall camp. We've been grinding to get all these episodes out. So if you missed part 1, which is where we broke down the quarterbacks, wide receivers, and running backs, or part 2, which is where we broke down the tight ends, the offensive line, and the defensive line, make sure to go back and check out those episodes, and then you can check out this one. In this episode, part 3, we're going to be breaking down the linebackers, cornerbacks, nickels, safeties, and then special teams. And then in part 4, which will come out probably a day or two after this one, that one's going to be a member exclusive video podcast on our Devil Sanctuary board. So if you're not tapped in over there, make sure to join. It's definitely worth your while. That's where part 4 will be, which is where we'll be talking about the biggest storylines and all the kind of hidden under the surface stuff heading into camp. So Chris, let's get straight into talking about these linebackers, because there was a lot of turnover at that position group. Obviously, when you lose 2 all-conference caliber guys in Keyshawn Elliott and Jordan Crook, you got to replace those guys somehow. And ASU hit the portal hard at linebacker, bringing in one of their biggest fish of the offseason in Owen Long, coming in from Colorado State. At Colorado State, he led the entire nation in tackles last season. You voted for him to be on the Big 12 preseason all-conference team. Just missed the cut, but regardless, there are some pretty high expectations for him over there at linebacker. You also have Zyrus Fiaseu, who's gotten a 6th year of eligibility. He's now on the Pat Tillman Leadership Council, kind of growing into that more lead by example type of role. Then you also have Martell Hughes, a guy who last season it kind of felt like, oh, he's the young guy that's next up. He's the guy who could break out. You had those press conference clips from Kenny Dillingham talking about how he's the young guy who's going to have to take a step. Do you think that those 3 guys are capable of replenishing the production that went out the door in losing 2 all-conference guys? Or do you think there might be a little bit of a drop-off there at linebacker?
Yeah, that's the appropriate question. It's hard to project those guys to be quite as good as what we saw last year from Elliott and Crook. I got to tell you, though, Owen Long had a very impressive spring. And when I went back and watched a lot of his film from Colorado State, I understood why. He is an extraordinarily instinctual, smart football player. And linebacker, that matters almost more than anywhere on the field other than quarterback. This guy just has a knack for understanding where the run is going to go. He immediately reacts to blocking development. He does a very good job of avoiding blockers, sifting his way through traffic, getting to the football. He has a honing device almost. Like in spring ball, he was always around the ball, and he played in a very similar scheme at Colorado State to what ASU uses. So that made it a more seamless transition to ASU. He's going to play that middle role, I think, and not a great athlete, not super big or strong or whatever. I would say he's more like an average size linebacker, maybe above average athlete, but not higher end. But he just overcomes a lot of that with how smart and instinctual. He's like another coach on the field. So I have no reason to expect that he won't continue to be one of the top tacklers, maybe in the Big 12 this year compared to what he did last year nationally. And then the other position was aided quite a lot by Cyrus Fiaseu getting that 6th year of eligibility. He had a foot injury last year that ruined his season, and that's the reason why he's back this year, playing 4 fewer games last year. And then Martell Hughes is somebody who, as a freshman 2 years ago, played as a sub-package player on passing downs. And then he continued that last year, but he got a little bit more burn as a base down player, and he's continued to get bigger and stronger. And so those guys are extremely well versed in the scheme at this point. They understand their roles. They're a little bit complementary. Fiaseu also has the ability to play as a backup Mike. I don't think Martell Hughes is ready for that. He's more of a will backer at this point. He can play on sub packages, but that's a very good, solid trio overall. Is it as good as Texas Tech has 2 all-conference caliber linebackers, one of whom Austin Romaine transferred from Kansas State. Thought he was a great player there. BYU has one of the top linebacker groups in the country. I don't know if this group would be as good as those, top 1 or 2, but I would say it's probably in a very close tier with a couple other teams behind that group, and certainly good enough to continue ASU's very strong tendency to stop the run at a high level, top 3 in that category in each of the last 2 seasons, and also be able to function well enough in the passing game, covering backs out of the backfield, getting zone drops, being in the right places.
And Chris, with those 3 guys kind of standing at the top of this linebacker room, there's only one more spot for that 4th spot in kind of that base down 2 deep. And it seems like the 2 top contenders for that role are Ramir Davis, who just transferred over from NAU, and also Prairie Young Blackgoat, who has a fantastic story as a former walk-on who's now really working his way up the depth chart. What do you kind of envision happening in that battle?
Yeah, I think that's going to be fascinating to see. Ramir Davis was a very good player at NAU last year as a freshman. He was somebody that was recruited by the Sun Devils and AJ Cooper, their linebackers coach, a couple years ago, and just kind of missed the cut of the scholarship that they gave out. Otherwise, he might have just come straight to ASU. But he demonstrated exactly what the coaches thought that he would at a lower level, at FCS level. I was very encouraged by his size in spring football. I thought that he was listed at like 215 or something like that, a lighter linebacker at NAU. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe this guy is going to have to get bigger and stronger and take a year to get ready. But I didn't think that after I saw him in spring ball. He got a little bit thicker, lower torso and legs than I had maybe anticipated, a little more strength that I think then showed up on the practice field. And he's quick. I mean, he's a sudden, very good athlete for a linebacker. And he's a legitimate contender for that 4th spot. And then Prairie Young Blackgoat, a former walk-on, probably their best or one of their best former walk-ons on the roster, defense almost for sure at this juncture. He's a hard hat guy. Like he will make you feel his presence as a linebacker when you're carrying the football. Big, heavy tackler, plays well between, in between the hashes, especially. He's not a plodding guy who's not mobile enough to do everything that ASU wants in its linebackers on base downs, but probably not as rangy or more fluid a mover as a couple of the other options. But I think he gets the job done, and he does it with a physical element that I think is hard to deny.
And Chris, if those are the 2 guys that are competing for that last spot, who are some of the younger guys? ASU brought in a lot of pretty respectable linebacker additions in its recruiting cycles over the last few years. You have guys like Mason Martin, Oscar Aguilar, Isaiah Yosefa, people that are coming in and could make an impact a couple years from now. Who are some of those younger guys that fans should kind of keep an eye on?
Yeah, the guy that really intrigued me the most in the spring with his growth trajectory, how much he improved from the fall as a redshirt, was Tristan Bacon. Former heavyweight championship caliber state wrestler in Arizona. He wrestled at a lighter weight, like 215 or something like that. Then he was 240 on ASU's roster last year. Feel like he was too heavy once he got off of the wrestling cycle of making sure that you had certain, you're staying in the weight class that you're trying to, and that's a regular, everyday process. So he probably needed to lose some weight. He did that. He looked much leaner and lighter on his feet and better. I think he's stout. He's physical. He understands leverage as a linebacker. I always like linebackers. Wrestlers, pardon me. I always like wrestlers who play linebacker or other positions where leverage super important. So he's, to me, is a future middle linebacker guy. Like maybe when Owen Long is gone, Owen Long's a junior, but in a couple of years, maybe Tristan Bacon is there competing for that role as a local guy. Isaiah Iosefa had a little bit of nagging injury stuff that maybe didn't allow him to do as much snaps as he otherwise would have garnered last year. I think he's made some pretty good strides. Another kid who's got a lot of physicality and plays with a reckless abandon and a real zeal for the game in a way that I think really pops when you watch practices. Puka Fuimeono I think he's got some similarities to Cyrus Fiaseu, kind of like a young Cyrus Fiaseu who plays with his hair on fire, violent tackler at the high school level, best player on a very good high school football team that was one of the top 25 teams in California over a 2-year period. So he's certainly one to watch to contend to replace Fiaseu or battle for that role next year or into the future. You mentioned the 2 true freshmen. They have Mason Martin, who had an insane number of tackles. He set his high school record for career tackles with several hundred. It was more than I can remember any ASU linebacker or any other player I've covered having at the high school level. He said it was all legit. It wasn't really juiced up in terms of how many tackles he was credited with. Turned on the film. Sure enough, the guy's making 1 million tackles. It's pretty crazy. He maybe is like a Keyshawn Elliott long term. Take a year or two and then see where he's at. And then Oscar Aguilar, another guy they're going to put in the incubator, freshman coming in from California. Wasn't as highly regarded as some of the other guys that they taken rankings wise. ASU really felt like he was undervalued as a prospect. And so we're going to see how he does at accomplishing what they hope for him as well. Those guys are not going to be in the mix, I don't think, this year for much playing time, other than maybe on special teams. We're getting rid of the sort of traditional red shirts where guys are going to be more like a 5 years to play 5. Linebackers are where you end up having core special teams players, kickoff, return, coverage, punt, coverage, return. So you may get some of these younger linebackers that are playing core roles that are important to the team.
All right, Chris. Well, with linebackers done and dusted, let's talk about ASU's cornerback room. This is another incredibly interesting one, especially given that news you broke within the last 48 hours or so that you touched on in the intro about Chance Rucker, ASU's addition from Michigan State, not being part of the team for this upcoming season. With that news, as well as the departures of Keith Abney and Javen Robinson, ASU's 2 starting corners from last season. Keith Abney obviously getting drafted by the Detroit Lions in the NFL, and then Javen Robinson transferring to Wisconsin seemed kind of like a business financial decision from the Sun Devils with that one. What is kind of the cornerback room looking like? You have Ashton Stamps coming in from LSU. He looks like a strong contender to start. Then you also have Rodney Bimage, a guy who was kind of waiting in the wings last season. And Keith Abney, once he was departing from the program, could not stop raving about how Bimage is next up. He talked about him at the NFL Draft Combine. All these things. Do you feel like those two are kind of the front runners to start in that room with the departures and then Chance Rucker also leaving? And do you have any extra information on kind of the Rucker situation that you didn't touch on in the intro?
Yeah, good questions. Javen Robinson, as you sort of set up there, that was a financial decision. Keith Abney was their best player over the last couple of years at corner, drafted in the NFL. Teams tended to target Javen Robinson a little bit more, and you have to make a decision about how much you think that somebody's valued financially worth compared to an option that you can go and grab in the portal and what you have returning. ASU made a decision that it thought that the economic value of the position would be better served to let Robinson go. And they brought in a guy who started at LSU for like a season and a half or so, 2023, 2024 in Ashton Stamps. Last year, he was a backup at LSU. Obviously, if you're a top backup at LSU, that's like better than a starter at a lot of places. In 2024, I think he was first or second in the SEC in passes defended. So this is somebody that has gone up against really elite passing attacks, wide receivers, and he's held his own. He's been in forged by fire, right, with some of these situations. And so now I think it's about, is what ASU expected from him going to translate to where he's able to be as good or better than Javen Robinson at a lower price point? I think that's the key decision that they have to make. And then Rodney Bimage, he had PFF grades last year that were better than Javen Robinson. I think he's a more physical player. He's taller, longer, bigger. So there's a lot of things to like about his game. He's got to be careful to not give up the big plays. He'd been on a double move last year. I remember where pass rush got there, and so they weren't able to take advantage of it. He had the shoulder and a stinger injury at the end of last season, was limited in spring ball. But to me, he's one of the higher upside guys in this sophomore class. And I would say that he's got an NFL opportunity down the line if he plays to my personal expectation. So I do think that those are the two most likely starters. But as we'll talk about here, there's a few others in this group that I think are going to push and have an opportunity if they play really well in camp to get a lot of early season opportunity.
So, Chris, let's just dive right into who those players are. There are a lot of guys on the roster that could potentially fit that mold. You have Joseph Smith. He started in the Sun Bowl. You have Nigel Pringle. He came in from Arkansas. You have Caleb Chester, a redshirt freshman working his way up. And then also a guy that fans might not know about if they weren't tapped into the board. You have Daquan Dunn, a true freshman who was absolutely lighting up the spring practice fields. You were very impressed with him. Who are the guys that people should keep their eyes on?
Yeah, so after this Rucker news, which is basically just ASU maybe not being happy enough with the overall trajectory of how that was going in terms of all the things that they ask of their players. It wasn't where didn't get in trouble off the field or anything like that. They're a little bit thinner, but I still think that they have very good options. They have Joseph Smith as a freshman, played in the Sun Bowl. He's 6 foot, 190, very good ball skills, plenty athletic to play the position. He did okay in the Sun Bowl, but for a true freshman in that type of an opportunity, I think he did well, relatively speaking, given his lack of experience. In spring this year, we saw Caleb Chester, who redshirted at Texas last year. He was one of the top players, I think, in passes defended in practices and scrimmage situations. He had a tendency to be very good at competing around the football. Well, that's a key thing. He's got to continue to, I think, become an even stronger player and really assignment sound in what he's doing in order to squeeze his way into a position. They have Nigel Pringle, who very long, lanky, 6'2", not quite as maybe physically strong as some of the other options, but he's got tremendous length and very good movement skills. Was practicing at Arkansas. You already know that's SEC practices are no joke. I mean, he's probably got a little higher level of overall readiness to be able to play the position. And then you mentioned Daquan Dunn. I think that the only defensive freshman in camp who impressed me more than Dunn was Julian Hugo, who we've talked extensively about, and I raved about him on the last podcast. Yeah. So I think if there's another freshman other than Hugo who has the most realistic pathway to getting meaningful game reps, I would say it might be Daquan Dunn. Played both ways in high school, smart, savvy, athletic, tough, dynamic, has a beyond his years kind of a feel, I think, for the game. So he might be like what Rodney Bimage was when he was a freshman at ASU, but with maybe better ball skills, I would say. So that's a pretty intriguing thing. Jalen Williams is another freshman who also I thought had a pretty good spring, getting his feet wet and everything, but he's a little bit of a longer play probably among their cornerback options.
And Chris, how important do you feel like the development and growth of this cornerback room with a lot of turnover is going to be for this defense this season? Do you feel like this is kind of one of those X factor position groups? And what do you expect from the cornerback room overall in terms of production?
The most important thing is going to be not giving up the big plays behind the defense. You'll remember, fans will remember Mississippi State last year. ASU gave up 3 big shot plays. One of those was on Javen Robinson early. It was Brendan Thompson. Brendan Thompson was second in FBS in yards per reception last year, so you knew what he was going to be, and they still gave up a deep shot. I think ASU gave up a wheel route for a touchdown against Texas. That was Montana Warren playing in place of Shamari Simmons. That first play, but when ASU's given up the big plays defensively, that's been a major factor in contributing to some losses or closer games than should have been the case. And when you lose your 2 starting corners, who generally were good at not giving up big plays, like Keith Abney was very good, Javen Robinson, reasonably good. That's the biggest question. Brian Ward, it's not an overly aggressive defense. They play a lot of zone coverage. You're going to give up some short to intermediate catches in front of you if you're a younger player, and that's going to be accepted. But you can't get beat vertically. So I want to see in scrimmages, especially because we know that they're going up against Omarion Miller and Reed Harris, right? It's not going to get harder than that once these guys are playing in the Big 12. So how well do Rodney Bimage and Lyric Rawls compete and prevent those big plays in the scrimmages and in other 11-on-11 type segments in practice? That will tell us a lot about the readiness of this defense overall to be to try to be comparable to what was the case last year. And I do think that the secondary, given how much has departed between corners and the safeties and nickels, which we're going to talk about in a second, I think that's one of the bigger questions about this defense and about this team overall going into camp.
Well, Chris, like you said, we'll talk about those safeties and nickels in a second. But first, we got to hear a word from our presenting sponsors over at Jones Auto Centers.
For over 60 years, the Glenn Jones name has been recognized for integrity and honesty.
And the Jones Auto Centers in Wickenburg.
Jones Ford Verde Valley.
Take a nice country drive out the Buckeyes.
When you're talking about Arizona's best, you're talking about the Jones Auto Group. It's quick, fast, strong.
I want to invite you to visit our new facility in Casa Grande and enjoy our country-style way of doing business. We're the Joneses.
Hello and welcome back into the Sun Devil Source podcast presented by Jones Auto Centers. And wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast, be sure to check out the description underneath because you can contact Parker Jones directly through phone or email if you're interested in buying a new or used vehicle from one of Jones Auto Centers' many dealerships around the valley. Parker Jones and Jones Ford Verde Valley have been huge supporters of ASU's NIL efforts over the past several years, so we're proud to have them as our podcast presenting sponsors, and that's another great reason for you Sun Devil fans to make them your go-to if you live in the valley and need a new or used vehicle. All right, Chris, let's get into those safeties and nickels that we were just talking about. There was a lot of turnover at that position group. It feels like a broken record here for this episode compared to some of the past episodes where there wasn't as much turnover. At safety and nickel, you lose Xavier Alford, you lose Miles Rouser, you lose Kendrick Breedlove, and now it looks like you're going to have 4 players competing for 3 starting spots. One of the top front runners, you have Boogie Wilson, who fans remember he subbed in for Xavier Alford last year when Alford went down and did a pretty good job. You also have Montana Warren, who's been a part of this program for years and has just been kind of working his way up year after year. You have Lyric Rawls, who led Kansas in unassisted tackles last year and is the only newcomer on ASU's Pat Tillman player-voted leadership council, so that says a lot about how his teammates view him. Then you also have Josiah McGrew, who's coming in after a very strong freshman season starting at FIU last year. He led the team with 4 interceptions. You talked about him in a lot of your board posts about how good he was looking in the spring. How do you see that 4-way battle for those 3 spots playing out this fall camp?
Yeah, if I had to handicap it, I would say that McGrew has the least odds, the worst odds of starting out of those 4 players. But his season was very compelling last year, and I was impressed by him in spring football. One of the challenges with him is I think McGrew has less versatility than the other three that you mentioned there. He pretty much can only play the free safety position. He's taller, longer leg, not quite as heavy, not as experienced at playing closer to the line of scrimmage, but somebody that has very good range, sideline to sideline. Ball skills are very impressive. He's a takeaway threat on the back end of the defense. He also tackles and is physical, coming up to make plays in front of him against the run or completions over the middle. So he was pretty impressive. Boogie Wilson, after playing free safety last year, primarily after Alford's injury, which really hurt the team, I think, he may move to nickel or maybe even boundary safety this year. He's as versatile as anybody in the group with his ability to play all three positions. He had the Mel Gibson Lethal Weapon shoulder pop out, pop in situation last year where he would get hurt, he'd go down. Let's finesse that shoulder. Let's get back out there. He's wearing the harness. I have a lot of respect for him. He had surgery after the season to fix his labrum, so that should be better this year. They were cautious with him in the spring, and that also maybe makes it to where he has a better opportunity to play in the more closer contact physical situations like you would at boundary safety or at nickel, right? Lyric Rawls he was the leading unassisted tackler at Kansas last year. 2 years of, two different Big 12 teams that he started at and played at a pretty high level. I feel like he's versatile enough to play boundary safety, free safety. He's physical, very good tackler. I think he's got good coverage skills reasonably for a safety. So I'm interested to see what happens with that. If McGrew ends up really good, then maybe you could, if you're ASU, you could bump Lyric Rawls down to boundary safety, and then Boogie Wilson maybe, or Montana Warren at nickel. But then Montana Warren has played quite well. He split the reps last year at nickel with Kendrick Breedlove, as he's now a member of the Pat Tillman Leadership Council in addition to Lyric Rawls. So you know that his teammates have a high level of respect for Montana Warren. He hasn't played boundary safety before, which is interesting because he played free safety and nickel, but I think that boundary might be his best position. And when I asked him about that at Big 12 Media Day, he said that, funny enough, his high school coaches actually told him the same thing, because he maybe isn't quite as good from a change of direction, coverage, man coverage standpoint. But he's very physical. He's one of the most physical, hard-hitting, tackling players on the roster. Loves coming up and delivering a blow. I think he should be pretty good against the run, which is what ASU asks that boundary safety position to be able to do on the short side of the field. So I'm interested in seeing how it plays out with these four guys battling, I think, for 3 spots.
And Chris, beyond the 4-way battle for those 3 spots, who are kind of some younger, more under the radar guys in those safety and nickel rooms that you think people should kind of keep on their radar for maybe a year or 2 down the line with some development?
Well, really, even this year, Kyan McDonald has a chance. I didn't put him in my top 4. I don't think he's going to be a starter, but for somebody who's been in with the Sun Devils for 2 years and he's played a decent amount at free safety and at nickel over the last 2 years, he's kind of been like a third option at both of those positions. Okay, now maybe he's a little bit closer to the opportunity to play. The coaches think that he's an assignment sound football player, very reliable in the role. I don't think he has quite as much physicality or maybe explosive athleticism as a couple of the other guys in the group. He's not as big, but the trust factor is pretty high with him, and that's a good backup that you can have as somebody who can play multiple spots. I feel like Ben Alafeo-Lili, he got hurt kind of last year, early on camp or whatever, but he looked like one of the better freshmen, and he can play multiple positions. I think he's mostly practiced at free safety, but he also could probably play boundary, maybe even nickel. We'll see about that. Antoine Belgrave Shorter came in from Penn State. He had a cast on one of his arms that was a carryover from, I think, an arm injury they suffered late last year at Penn State. And so that prevented us from getting a full analysis of him because he wasn't out there in 11-on-11s. He had been recruited to Penn State as a corner, and he started actually some games as a safety early on in the season, but then he got replaced when he had some assignment issues in coverage. So I think that the move from corner to safety and then him starting all of a sudden at safety, that was maybe a little bit too much for him. But just the fact that you're starting games at Penn State and now he's only still a sophomore, a redshirt sophomore, okay, that bodes well for his ability. It was harder to really assess it because, again, he didn't do 11-on-11 and he was limited in spring ball. He's somebody who could maybe sneak up on some others in this group, which would be an interesting thing if that happened. And then they have a redshirt freshman, Caleb Chester. Redshirt freshman, Xavier Scoron. And they have true freshman Davis Kinney and Zeth Tews. I felt Zeth Tews, a local guy, went to Liberty High School. I felt like he had a very good spring, huge family contingent out there, wearing shirts with his name on it at scrimmage. That was pretty cool to see. He and Kinney, they dual trained. Those guys were getting reps at multiple positions as Brian Ward, ASU's defensive coordinator, was trying to accelerate their understanding of the scheme. I don't think those guys are likely to play. Any of those redshirt freshmen, probably not ready to play yet, contending with a lot of these older, more veteran guys. But based upon what I saw from spring, I think they have plenty of potential for the future.
Well, Chris, let's talk about these special teams because it felt like special teams was such a hot topic for ASU last year. It felt like every Monday press conference, there were special teams questions rolling in. The fans were always wondering about them. And the reason why is because ASU was the second worst team in the nation in net punting last year. That is not a good stat if you want to succeed. So ASU was like, all right, let's revamp this a little bit. You have Nick McClarty coming in from Ohio State. He's 6'7". Don't do the thing. Okay. Coming in from Ohio State, he's a big punter. He has a huge booming leg, can kick it very, very far. One of his punts went pretty viral on social media. I remember that. You have Mike Seifries coming in and joining the staff, who was an NFL punter for well over a decade. That's a very experienced mind who can come in and teach kind of some niche things to ASU's punters. And then at kicker, you bring in Carson Smith from Austin Peay, who had previous experience with special teams coordinator Jack Nudo, to replace ASU's kicker from last season, Jesus Gomez. You have Tyler Wigglesworth kind of returning as a long snapper. And then for kick returner and punt returner, those roles are kind of to be determined who could fill those roles. There's probably 3 or 4 guys that I'm sure you'll touch on who really have a shot at that. So just kind of give a brief overview of what ASU special teams is looking like right now from top to bottom.
Yeah, as you correctly said there, this was a anger point for a lot of ASU fans over the last few years.
I was a little nicer than anger point. I said it was a talking point, but yes, an anger point.
it was some people thought about kicking their dog when in some of these situations. Not saying they did it. I'm just saying it's a phrase. But they were so bad at net punting. And look, they added a kicker from Australia late, Matt McKenzie. That didn't work out. Their starting kicker, punter, Canyon Floyd, had a quad injury from the outset. He never seemed like he was fully healthy after an below average, honestly, freshman season the year prior. Starting field position matters so much, and ASU was much worse than its opponents at that category in recent years. That has to improve, right? And you touched on Mike Seifries. I think he was giving immediate feedback that we saw after every single punt in spring ball with both of those players. Correctly, you said that Nick McClarty has a very big leg. The question is, can he have consistency with the type of quick operational time that's needed in game situations, right? If you're doing it a half second slower than you need to in games and you're booming it, well, that's not enough. Like, you got to be able to do it at this pace that you need to be able to do it. So they got to dial that up a little bit. I do think that he has a very good chance to start. It's going to take better punting than we've seen from Canyon Floyd for him to be the starting punter this year, I think. And they have two options that are legitimate. Last year, they never really had, McKenzie never was good in practices. Like that was a late addition that just didn't work out, right? And then Jack Nudo, ASU special teams coach, he had Coach Carson Smith at Austin P. And so he was a FCS all-conference level kicker. Very accurate. Does he have like the biggest leg? Maybe not, but he's got 50-yard range at Mountain America Stadium for sure, which is kind of all that you really need to have from, that you expect, I should say, from a guy in that role. Tyler Wigglesworth snapped at times for ASU. They had another long snapper who departed. They added Grayson Curtis. He was a long snapper who did a pretty good job with his operational time and accuracy last year. So I don't think snapping is going to be a vulnerability. And then I'm not sure who their punt and kick returners are going to be. They spent time trying out a bunch of guys in the spring. And then usually once you get into the couple weeks in the preseason camp, you get a much better idea of it. Are they going to trust going with some of their starters? Like, remember, ASU didn't want to use N'Keal Harry too much as a kick returner, but they did sometimes. And he had some big plays. Omarion Miller is somebody that would make a lot of sense as a kickoff returner. But do you want to put him in that situation? I don't know. Jaron Hamilton, big speed. I thought they should have used him more last season in that role. And then punt returner, you're going to get some of your, shiftier options that are more reliable and make sure that you catch the football, not let things bounce that you shouldn't, which has also been a problem that ASU had last year when Zechariah Sample and some other guys were fielding some of these. So Corey Butler reminds me of Melquan Stovall. Derek Eusebio is a very reliable guy that you can put back there. And then, if they end up with somebody more dynamic, is that person going to be able to do the job without muffing some of these punts or letting balls bounce and giving 10, 20 extra yards to opponents? That shouldn't be the case. I think that's the most important thing that we're looking for.
Well, that'll do it for this part 3 episode. A little bit shorter than parts 1 and 2. And if you guys missed out on anything that we were talking about with skill positions or the trenches or anything like that, make sure to check out parts 1 and 2 on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you're listening to this. We appreciate everyone that tuned in. And just a reminder, part 4 is going to be a members only podcast. So if you're listening to this and you're not already on our Devil Sanctuary Sun Devil Source board, got to tap into that. You see Chris pointing at the screen. You got to join up. A lot of important insider information that we talk about on there. But that'll do it for this episode. We appreciate everybody that tuned in, and we hope you all have a great rest of your day.